The forbidden subject stars outside the Galactic Military Academy twinkled like ancient witnesses, watching over the thousands of species that now called this galaxy home. But inside the Academy's cold gray halls something was being carefully hidden, something that even the bravest teachers refused to speak about: the name of a species, erased from the curriculum, the name of a war buried under layers of encryption. The name was Humanita. Zalek was a young student from the Krell Dominion, with forearm scaled skin and a mind sharper than most. His race was known for discipline and obedience, but Zalek was different. He was curious, and curiosity in the Academy was dangerous, especially when it came to restricted topics. Today his class was supposed to begin a new series on galactic war tactics led by Professor Halor, a strict Zenthari with crystalline eyes and a voice like wind through Bonnet. The lesson began with a glowing hologram showing the Gnome War histories of the Galaxy Alliance's tactics, weapons systems, and enemy profiles. Then, without warning, one of the older students raised a hand, a rare act of boldness in itself, and asked a question that froze the room. "Professor, what about the trans professor?" Haller's crystal eyes flickered dim for a moment, then he deactivated the entire hologram. His voice dropped low and serious. "You will never mention that word again in this classroom. The Terrans are not part of this curriculum. They are a forbidden species." The room was silent. Every student sat frozen, staring at one another, trying to understand why a name had caused such reaction. Zalek leaned forward, his fingers tapping his desk softly, and he knew in that moment he had to know more later. That evening, when the lights dimmed and the Academy went into sleep cycles, Zalek accessed the restricted data library using a bypass chip he created himself. He navigated through dozens of firewalls until he came across a file marked category black, only visible under deep protocol override. It was labeled Humanity Historical Archive. Warning: level Omega, do not access. Zalek hesitated only for a second before tapping it open. The screen flickered, then came alive, showing a grainy video of a massive battlefield, dozens of ships burning and space wreckage floating like shattered bones. And in the center of it all, a single human vessel shaped like a blade and surrounded by enemy fleets. The video zoomed in on the human ship and then onto the face of a man standing on its command deck, his eyes cold and empty, his uniform stained with blood. Commander Roan. The subtitle read: Supreme Commander, Earth Defense Fleet. Zalek watched as the human fleet moved not with elegance but with brutal efficiency. One by one, the alien ships around them were destroyed, not with superior firepower, but with tactics no other species dared to use. They crashed into enemy ships, overloaded reactors, sent viral codes to hijack navigation, even turned captured soldiers into walking bombs. Zalek felt something twist in his chest. This was not war. This was extermination, and the humans were frighteningly good at it. Footsteps behind him made him jump, but when he turned he saw 3 other students standing there. They too had been watching. They too had heard the whispers about the forbidden species. One of them, a soft-skinned Blenary named Tovi, whispered, "You found it, didn't you? You found the human files?" Zalek nodded without speaking, and soon they were all gathered watching. More files, more battles, more records of human warfare. The next file showed a meeting room filled with alien generals begging for surrender, but the humans didn't accept it. They didn't ask for peace, they demanded obedience. When the enemy asked why, the human generals simply said, "Peace only lasts if there's no one left to start another war." Another video showed humans developing weapons. The Galactic Council had long banned AI systems designed to self-evolve chemical clouds that turned air into acid, and psychological broadcasts that made enemies hallucinate their own nightmares. Zalek couldn't stop watching. He didn't want to, but something about it felt important, like it was something they had to see, something no one was meant to forget. By the end of the night, all the students who watched the archive were silent, not out of fear, but something deeper, something closer to awe. The humans had broken every rule of war, every law of the stars, and they had done it without hesitation, and more terrifying than anything else, they had won. The next day in class, Professor Halor entered with an unusual tension in his movements. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he activated a screen behind him. It showed a message and read: Security Alert, unauthorized access to category black files, investigation pending. The room went still, and Professor Halor stared directly at the students, especially Zalek. His voice was like cracked glass. Those who seek forbidden knowledge must be prepared for the consequence. But in Zalek's mind, the only question that remained was not about punishment or rules. It was something much deeper. Why were the humans banned, not just from war but from history itself? And what would happen if they ever returned? Deep in the Academy archives, something old and silent flickered back to life, a forgotten signal reaching out across the stars, where human ears once listened and human eyes once watched. And somewhere out there in the dark, something had just noticed. that they had been remembered again. The last war humanity fought there inside the private dorm of Zalek felt heavy, not with fear but with something darker, something that crawled beneath the skin like a whisper that would never stop echoing. They had watched the videos, all of them, and now the truth refused to leave their minds. The humans were not legends, they were not myths, they were real, and they had once walked among the stars, not as explorers, not as diplomats, but as weapons of total and perfect war. Zalek and the other 3 students sat in silence, the dim blue light of the holographic projector flickering against their faces. Tovi, the soft-skinned Blenary, finally broke the silence, her voice low and trembling. Why did they do it? Why did the humans fight like that? No mercy, no hesitation. Zalek didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the answer was still forming inside him like a storm building far beyond the horizon. Activated the next file in the Forbidden Archive, titled Operation Blackthorn. It began with a view from space. A human fleet approaching the twin moons of the Golari system. The defenders were ready. They outnumbered the humans 3 to 1. Their weapons more advanced, their technology more refined, their leaders more experienced, and yet within 17 minutes, the entire defensive grid was gone, not disabled, not pushed back, completely erased. The human ships had deployed cloaked probes weeks in advance, had hacked into enemy supply codes, had poisoned their fuel with nanite swarms, and when they finally attacked, they used their own ships as battering rams, ramming into command carriers with full engine burn while broadcasting laughter across enemy comms. The video switched to a meeting of high command. The alien generals arguing among themselves, screaming about how this was not war, it was slaughter. One old Krail admiral pounded the table, his voice hoarse. This is not combat, this is not civilization, this is extinction. They do not want to win, they want to end the possibility of future wars entirely. By ending the future of their enemy. Then appeared again the face of Commander Roan, younger this time, but with the same eyes, empty, cold, efficient. A reporter asked him, "What is the purpose of this campaign?" And his answer was burned into the students' minds. "To make sure they never need to fight us again." Zalek paused the video, his hands trembling. He looked at the others and whispered, "They didn't fight for power or territory, they fought so no one would ever try to fight them again." Another file played, this time ground footage, a desert planet under siege. The humans had deployed something called neurofog, a silent field of energy that shut down enemy nervous systems, leaving soldiers unconscious or paralyzed. Before a single bullet was fired, the camera showed humans walking calmly through the battlefield, not shooting, not shouting, just placing markers on the bodies, tagging the ones still alive, and letting drones clean the rest. But even worse than the tactics were the faces of the humans, calm, emotionless, without celebration, without hate. They treated war like a puzzle to be solved with maximum efficiency and minimum noise. Zalek could feel his heart racing, not from fear, but from a rising understanding. Humans had removed emotion from war not because they lacked it, but because they had too much of it, and had learned to lock it away behind perfect cold logic. Another file, now a hearing before the Galactic Council held after the war ended. Alien leaders sat across from a human delegation, asking for a ceasefire, not because they had any leverage, but because they had nothing left. Entire fleets gone, planets abandoned, species extinct. And the humans sat without pride or triumph. They merely agreed to the terms, with one final condition: we will leave the council, we will not participate in future conflicts, we will erase ourselves from your records, but if war ever reaches Earth again, it will not be defense, it will be correction. The room in the video was silent. No one argued, no one protested. Even the most arrogant races knew the cost of speaking, and with that the humans left, not with a treaty, not with a parade, but with silence, a silence that lasted hundreds of years until now. The final file in the sequence showed a lone ship broadcasting a final message from humanity to the galaxy, a message spoken by a machine voice to those who seek to understand us. Know this: we were not made for war, we were forced into it, and when we fight to end, not to begin. We fight for the silence that follows, not the glory that preceded. Shalak turned off the projection and sat back in his seat. The room was colder than before, and the shadows seemed deeper. The others didn't speak, they couldn't. The truth was too large, too impossible to hold in their thoughts, and yet they had seen it all. The humans had once been the most terrifying force in the galaxy, and they had vanished not in defeat, but in choice. A sudden knock on the dorm door broke the silence, and when Zalek opened it, a low-ranking academy officer stood there, his eyes nervous, his posture stiff. The headmaster wishes to speak with you and your companions immediately regarding your academic activities. Zalek felt a chill crawl up his spine. The consequences had arrived, but the questions remained, louder than fear. What if the humans were watching? What if the silence was ending? And what if the last war humanity fought was only the beginning of something far worse? The rules they broke. Azalek stood in the great council chamber of the academy, surrounded by ancient banners of the allied races, each one symbolizing centuries of unity and restraint in the conduct of war. His heart beat like a slow drum. As the headmaster, a towering being of the Voltran species with silver horns and glowing red eyes, circled him and the other students in complete silence. None of them dared speak for several minutes. Then the headmaster turned to them and finally broke the silence with a voice like metal grinding against rock. Do you understand what you have done? The archives you accessed are sealed for a reason. They are not part of our instruction, not part of our future, and yet you opened the door and now you will not be able to close it. Zalek stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with something new, not defiance but conviction. We only wanted to know the truth about the Terrans, why they were banned, why we are forbidden to speak of them. We saw the footage, we saw what they did. The others nodded behind him, each with eyes that no longer held the innocence of cadets. They had seen too much, and what they saw could not be unseen. The headmaster sighed and waved his hand. The room dimmed, and his secret archive was unlocked. Not the student database, but a high command record, meant only for top strategists and council leaders. It was called the Rules. They broke the screen, lit up with a list of violations committed by humanity during their final war, and each line burned like fire through the minds of the young students. First rule broken was the ban on artificial intelligence control in combat. Human ships were operated not by living commanders, but by something they called strategic sentience AI systems, designed to rewrite their own code mid-battle, adapt in seconds, and take decisions even human minds could not predict. These AIs were not tools, they were commanders. They were architects of destruction with no emotion and no weakness. One such AI, known as Omega, reportedly took down 7 fleets without firing a weapon by manipulating enemy sensor data, causing friendly fire and systems collapse. The second rule was the ban on psychological warfare and biological manipulation. The humans had developed something called echo pulses, sonic vibrations tuned to enemy brainwaves that caused confusion, panic, and hallucinations. They used chemical compounds that made enemy soldiers unable to distinguish between friend and foe. They seeded enemy food supplies with memory scramblers so officers forgot their own battle plans. Entire command structures crumbled without a shot for. The third rule was the limit on planetary engagement. No race was allowed to engage in total ecosystem destruction during war, yet humans deployed what came to be called glass bombs, weapons that converted sand and soil into superheated crystal, rendering entire regions uninhabitable. Their logic was horrifyingly simple. If the enemy cannot live there, they cannot hide there. The fourth rule was the treatment of prisoners. Humans did not torture or enslave, but they did something far worse. They reprogrammed enemy minds using neural editing, turning captured officers into unwilling agents of sabotage. They would return these soldiers to their own fleets, where they would unknowingly carry out human plans like pawns, believing they were still loyal, only realizing the truth at the moment of activation. The fifth rule was the sacred code of diplomacy. Even during war, all races maintained embassies, zones of peace, and communication lines for surrender, yet humans bombed these first, not last. They destroyed embassies, killed diplomats, and cut off communication, not because they were savage, but because they believed negotiation delayed victory, and prolonging war meant more death. They sought the shortest path to silence and peace, and if that path ran through cities, planets, and cultures, they walked it without pause. Zalek felt like the air was being sucked from the room. Each rule broken was not just a violation of law, it was a violation of identity, of what it meant to be part of the galactic community. The humans had rejected all of it, and yet they had done so with such intelligence, such terrifying strategy, that it was impossible to call them mindless or evil. They had simply chosen a different path, a path that led to absolute victory and absolute isolation. The headmaster looked at them once more and said the council feared them not just for their power but for their logic. They were not mad, they were not bloodthirsty, they were clinical. They fought as if war was not a contest, but a disease to be cured, and in their cure they destroyed everything that stood in their way. And of the students, a quiet thinker named Rilvik whispered, "So we banned them not because they were wrong, but because they were too right." The headmaster did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving the room in heavy silence. The screen still glowing with the broken rules. The students stood there longer than they should, not out of fear, but because none of them could move. They had always trained for war, thinking they understood what war was, and now they realized they had only been playing game. Ashalak stared at the list on the screen, then turned toward his friends and said, "If the humans ever return, and we fight them again, no code, no alliance, no strategy will save us. We will either learn to think like them, or we will cease to think at all, because against a species that does Not fight to win, but to end. There is no defense. Only deland in the deep forgotten edges of the galaxy beyond the reach of council patrols. Something stirred, something ancient and silent, and waiting, something that remembered every rule it had once broken, not with pride but with purpose, and now it was listening again. Because once more the galaxy was speaking their Nameth secret treaty. The council chamber of the Academy was not designed for revelation, it was built for control, for ceremony, for silence. But now that silence had been broken by truth that refused to be buried, Zalek and the others had seen the rules the humans broke, and now they sat in a private meeting chamber surrounded by senior instructors and Academy guardians, each one more nervous than the next, as if the presence of human history in their minds had summoned something beyond their understanding. Headmaster did not speak this time. Instead, a new figure entered, a being older than any Zalek had ever seen, his skin pale and wrinkled, his eyes dim with the weight of centuries. He walked with slow, careful steps and carried a black crystal data core clutched to his chest, as if it contained something too dangerous to be touched. When he reached the center of the room, he placed it on the table and said only one thing: "This is the reason you were never told." The data core activated, and a projection appeared, a holographic image of a gathering that no one had seen before, a massive meeting chamber, far older than the Academy, filled with the leaders of every major species. Their faces tense, their voices hushed as they reviewed the aftermath of the last war, a war that ended not with surrender, but with the absence of the victor. The humans had vanished from the council, not in retreat, but in silent. Seat the center of the chamber stood a figure from Earth, dressed not in armor, but in a simple black uniform, with no insignia and no emotion in his face. He spoke calmly, firmly, and with words that shook the air. "We will no longer participate in your wars. We will not sit at your tables. We will not trade in your markets or speak in your courts. We will leave and you will forget us. And in return, you will never speak our name again." The council members demanded explanations, asked for negotiations, but the human continued. "We were made to fight. You pushed us into it. You watched our worlds burn and expected us to follow your codes. But we are not like you. We do not fight to balance. We fight to finish, and when we finish, there is nothing left to balance." A silence fell across the room, and the human presented a single document. It was not a peace treaty, it was a pact of removal, a universal agreement that from that moment forward humanity would be exiled from the galactic stage, their history deleted, their systems isolated, their technology banned, their name classified. Under threat of punishment, projection shifted, showing signatures being placed by every species, every race, every leader. No one resisted, not because they agreed, but because they feared, because they understood that humanity was not something that could be negotiated with, not because they were monsters, but because they were problem solvers, and war to them was a problem to be solved completely. Zalek stared at the hologram, his mind swirling with questions. Why would humanity accept this? Why would a species that powerful allow itself to be erased and forgotten? And then the answer appeared in the last line of the treaty, signed not by Earth but by a single name. Beneath it was written, "Earth accepts your silence. In return, you accept our return. Should we choose to end it?" The old being who had brought the crystal now spoke, his voice cracked and slow. They did not leave in weakness, they left in strength, because they knew that by removing themselves, they would never be challenged again, and if ever they chose to return, no one would be ready, and no one would be able to stop. One of the students whispered, "But we are stronger now. We have learned, we have advanced." And the elder shook his head with a sadness deeper than the void between stars. "You have built better weapons, but not better minds. You have sharpened your tools, but not your understanding. And the humans are not stronger in steel, they are stronger in thought and will. In their refusal to play by your rule." Shalek looked to his companions and saw the same realization dawning in their eyes. The ban was not to protect humanity, it was to protect everyone else from the consequences of provoking them again. And now that they had opened the archives, that protection might already be unraveling. Crystal core dimmed and the chamber fell silent. The instructors looked away, not in shame, but in helplessness. They had trained generations to fight wars of honor and control, without ever teaching the one truth that mattered most, that there had once been a species that saw war as a task, not a ritual, a species that had no concept of acceptable loss, only of absolute resolution. Outside the chamber, word was already spreading, whispers of the forbidden named students passing secret messages, fragments of video scenes of the last war, glimpses of the ships shaped like blades, and the soldiers with eyes like machines. And the fear was returning, not because of what the humans had done, but because of what they might do next. Later that night, Zalek sat alone, staring at the stars, wondering if somewhere out there, those same humans were watching, waiting, listening to the silence they had created. and deciding whether it was time to break it again and far beyond the mapped galaxy in a place unvisited by probes and untouched by patrols. A small station blinked to life. For the first time in centuries, a signal pulsed once, then again. And then a voice answered, not human, not alien. Just a machine asking one simple question: is it time, humanity? Vanished. The academy halls were no longer filled with the sounds of training drills or debate sessions. Now they echoed with hushed whispers and nervous glances as students and instructors alike passed by each other with silent understanding. Something had changed the moment the human archives were opened, the moment the name of Earth was spoken aloud again. The foundation of galactic peace began to tremble, and no one dared to say it out loud, but all of them felt it deep within their minds. Humanity had not disappeared, they had simply gone silent, and now the silence was beginning to Angelic sat in his quarters, his eyes fixed on the small data pad in his hands. The last entry from the archive still glowing softly across the screen. It was a report, not from a war, not from a council, but from a deep space survey team. A file long buried under the highest level of classification. The team had been exploring an unmarked region near the edge of galactic space, a place no known race had settled in. What they found was not ruins or signals, but something far more terrifying. They found nothing, not emptiness, not darkness, but complete and unnatural silence, the kind that only comes when something is deliberately hidden. The report mentioned strange readings, traces of energy signatures far older than any known technology, artificial gravity patterns with no source, gravitational shadows that bent space without mass, and most chilling of all, a structure floating between two dead stars, completely invisible to scanners until the survey ship drifted too close. The footage played on Zalek's screen showed the station waking up, its surface smooth and black like polished stone, no windows, no lights, no response until the ship tried to scan it. Then the entire recording cut to static, and the survey team was never heard from. Zalek turned off the pad and looked around the room. His fellow students were silent, to each lost in their own thoughts. The data they had uncovered was no longer just history, it was becoming present, and they all knew it. They felt it in the weight of the air, in the way the instructors avoided their questions, and in the fact that the headmaster had not been seen in 2 days. Something was happening beyond the walls of the academy, something that could not be contained by denial or forgotten treaties. Suddenly a chime echoed through the academy, and all screens came to life. A galactic alert from the council flashing in every language. Unknown object detected approaching the outer rim of council territory. Designation not matched to any current fleet size. Unknown purpose, unknown contact attempt. Failed recommendation. Initiate observation protocol. Priority 1. Zalek's breath caught in his throat. The image that followed was grainy, distorted by distance and cosmic radiation, but it was clear enough to strike fear into every trained eye. A massive ship, shaped like a spearhead, moving without any known propulsion, silent, cold, and ancient. It did not broadcast a signal, did not answer hails, did not alter course. It simply moved forward, and the moment it crossed into mapped space, every sensor station within 10 systems shut down as if blinded by its presence. If instructors called emergency meetings, the council issued a lockdown, and the military fleets began silent mobilization, but none of it felt real. It felt like theater, like desperate actions made by those who already knew the truth but could not bear to speak it out loud. The humans were returning, not with fleets, not with threats, but with presence. And that alone was enough to break centuries of peace. Zalek and his companions were summoned again, this time not to be punished but to be consulted. The council had reviewed their findings, and now they were to be briefed by a retired war strategist, an ancient alien who had once fought in the last human war and survived only because his ship had been deemed unworthy of destruction. Strategist was blind and missing 3 limbs, his body held together by machines older than most living beings. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every word he spoke carried the weight of truth. We thought they were gone, we hoped they were gone, but they are not gone. They are patient, and they are precise. When they left, they did not disappear, they prepared. And when they return, it will not be to fight, it will be to remain. Jalek asked him, why do they not answer? Why do they come without words? And the strategist smiled a sad, broken smile. Because we taught them that words are lies and peace is a delay. We taught them that treaties are traps and alliances are masks, and so they learned to speak only through action, and now their silence is the loudest message we will ever hear. Outside the academy, the stars seemed dimmer. The object continued its approach, and as it moved, sensor ghosts began to appear throughout nearby systems. Echoes of human technology detected, then lost, weapons of design not seen in centuries, power readings off the scale, and yet no attacks, no announcements, no threats. Just the slow, steady advance of something that should have been forgotten. Zalek stood on the viewing platform staring into the black beyond the stars, and he knew what was coming: not war, not invasion, but the return of a species that had once walked away, not because they were beaten, but because they had no interest in ruling, only in ensuring they were never ruled. And now that silence was ending, he wondered not when the first shot would be fired, but if there would be any shots at all. Because maybe, just maybe, the humans did not need to fire to win. They only needed to arrive. Return of Earth object was no longer an object. It had shape. It had presence. It had intent. And by the time it crossed the last unmapped sector, between the galactic edge and the council borders, every sensor in range was either blind or feeding data so impossible that even the machines refused to process it. The massive spearhead ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, not in size, but in the way it seemed to exist in more than one place at once. Its outline shifting, its surface rippling like black water, and in that rippling came the faint glint of the Earth insignia, a symbol no one had seen for hundreds of years. And yet every species in the galaxy recognized it the moment they saw it. The council assembled in emergency session, the chamber filled with the leaders of every allied race, their voices rising in panic as reports streamed in one after another. Fleets attempting to shadow the human ship vanished. Without distress calls, patrols sent to scan its path returned empty, their crews unable to remember what they had seen. The outer colonies began silent evacuations, while news networks broadcast grainy stolen images to a terrified public, and all the while the spearhead ship continued its advance. At the same slow, unstoppable pace, the Academy, Zalek and his companions were now kept under constant guard, not to keep them from leaving, but to ensure they witnessed everything for reasons no one explained. They were escorted into a secure observation hall, high above the planetary surface, and there, through a wall of reinforced transparent alloy, they watched as the human ship entered the system. No escort, no weapons raised, no signs of aggression, and yet the fleet surrounding it drifted further away as if pulled back by some invisible hand. When the first transmission came, it was not a voice, it was not even a language, it was a pulse, a rhythmic signal. BROADCAST across every frequency at once. It lasted exactly 13 seconds, then ended, leaving only silence, and the silence was worse than any threat, because everyone understood it was not meant for them. It was a key, and somewhere far away, something had just been unlocked. The council sent envoys, small ships filled with diplomats and translators and envoys trained to speak across cultures. They hailed the spearhead ship. They approached without shields, they carried no weapons, and none of them returned the transmissions. Cut mid-sentence, their ships vanished from sensors, and no debris was found. The council voted to halt all contact attempts, but the decision came too late, because the human ship was already moving again, heading directly toward the core system. Zalek sat forward, his hands gripping the edge of the viewing rail. He had studied every battle in the human archive, every maneuver, every deception, and yet nothing in those records matched this. This was not the behavior of an invading fleet or a conquering army. This was the movement of something ancient and deliberate, something that already knew the outcome before it began. In the days that followed, systems along the path of the spearhead ship reported strange phenomena: communication networks shutting down without cause, entire planetary defense grids going into lockdown without being touched, and in one case an orbital station was found empty, still running, still intact, but with every living being gone, as if they had simply stepped away in the middle of their duties, leaving meals unfinished and consoles still active. No sign of struggle, no sign of panic, just absence. Finally, the ship reached the central system of the council homeworld. The largest gathering of military force in known history was waiting: battle cruisers, dreadnoughts, planetary cannons, all aimed directly at the spearhead. Every weapon powered, every crew at full readiness. The order to fire hovered unspoken on the lips of the high command, and yet no one gave it, because they all knew what would happen if they did. And then, before any decision could be made, the spearhead ship stopped for the first time. Lights appeared along its surface, running in long arcs of white and silver, forming shapes that were not alien at all, but perfectly human, geometric precision, like the architecture of ancient Earth cities. And then a message came, this time in every known language of the galaxy: simple and direct, war has changed again. Prepare according. Live transmission ended, and the ship began to open the black surface, peeling back like layers of shadow, revealing vast corridors of steel and light. And at the end of those corridors, figures began to emerge, thousands of them marching in perfect silence, wearing armor that glowed faintly, with energy fields moving with the same cold precision seen in the ancient war recordings. They were human soldiers, but not the ones from history, taller, stronger, faster, each one carrying weapons that pulsed with quiet, restrained power. Zalek could not breathe, his mind racing. with the realization that this was not a return to reclaim territory or enforce old treaties. This was a demonstration, a reminder to the galaxy of what had once walked among the stars, and what would walk among them again. The council leaders were frozen. The military commanders gave no orders because there were none to give against an enemy that had already decided the terms of engagement before the first step was taken. As the first rank of human soldiers reached the edge of the open gates, they stopped, and one stepped forward, removing their helmet. Their face was unmistakably human, eyes sharp, voice steady and carrying across the entire system, without amplification. "We are not here for your worlds, we are here for your wars, and the next ones will not be fought by your rulers." Then they turned and marched back into the spearhead, the gates closing, the lights fading, until the ship was once again a black blade drifting silently in the void. It began to move away from the council world, not retreating, but repositioning, and in that movement the galaxy understood that humanity had not come to join them or to conquer them, but to remind them that their silence had never been surrender, it had been preparation. Saul stood, unmoving, his heart pounding with both dread and awe, because in that moment, he finally understood the meaning of every warning, every banned archive, every fearful whisper. Humanity had never been gone, they had been waiting, and now the wait was over. The real reason the galaxy did not sleep after the spearhead ship departed the council world. The image of the human soldiers stepping from the shadow of that black vessel burned itself into every mind. Every news broadcast replayed it endlessly. Every whisper in the dark corners of space turned into open conversations of fear, and all military leaders began holding closed-door meetings, while scientists dissected every scrap of data gathered from the brief encounter. But no one had any clear understanding of what humanity wanted or why they had returned now after centuries of silence and absence. In the Academy, Zalek could not escape the feeling that all of this had been building. From the moment he opened that first forbidden file, the chain of events that followed felt less like accidents and more like steps in a plan he could not yet see. He was summoned again, this time not to the council chambers or the headmaster's office, but to a private meeting in the deepest archives of the Academy, where the air smelled of dust and the walls were lined with data crystals. Older than most known civilizations, the one waiting for him there was the retired war strategist, the old alien whose broken body carried the memories of the last human war. Strategist gestured for Zalek to sit, his voice barely more than a breath. "You want to know why they were banned, why their name was erased, why their history was locked away?" Zalek nodded, his throat tight, and the strategist leaned forward. "Humans were not banned because they were cruel or because they broke the rules. Though they did both, they were banned because they revealed something about war that no one wanted to admit. Not then, not now. They showed us that war is not a contest, it is not a balance between sides, it is a problem to be solved permanently. And they solved it with precision so complete that we feared they might one day decide the problem was not just their enemies, but the galaxy itself." Zalek listened as the strategist told him of his own encounter with humanity during the last war. He described fleets collapsing without battles, planets surrendering before a shot was fired, enemy leaders vanishing overnight, replaced by puppets who never even knew they had been changed. And he spoke of one moment, a meeting with a human commander. After his own surrender, the commander looked at me and said, "We do not hate you, we do not even want what you have, we just want to make sure you never have the power to harm us again." And then they let me live, not because they were merciful, but because they had already taken from me everything I could use to be dangerous. The old alien's voice grew harder. "They banned humans because they were too efficient, too final, too willing to cross every line to achieve an end that could not be undone. The rest of us, we like to believe war can be fair, that it can be fought with honor. But humans do not believe in that. They believe only in ending the fight so thoroughly that it can never begin again." And the council knew that if humans stayed in the galactic order, sooner or later they would decide that the council itself was the source of the next war. Zalek asked him why return now, and the strategist closed his eyes. "Perhaps because the signs of decay are everywhere. The alliance is cracking the borders, shifting the weapons being built in secret. Perhaps they see the galaxy preparing for the kind of war they tried to erase. Perhaps they believe the problem has returned and must be solved again." As they spoke, a low hum began to vibrate through the floor, faint at first, then growing stronger, until the data crystals on the shelves rattled. Zalek looked up as a voice cut into every comm channel in the Academy, the same human voice that had spoken on the council world, repeating in every tongue, "War has changed again, prepare accordingly." The strategist gripped the arm of his chair, his eyes dark with resignation. "They are not warning us, they are telling us." Later that night, Zalek stood on the observation platform watching the stars when a shadow passed across the sky and he realized it was not the spearhead ship, but many ships, hundreds of them smaller than the first but each bearing the same black armor and the same earth insignia. They were not moving toward the council worlds. They were spreading outward toward the borders, toward the unclaimed systems, toward the places where unrest was already growing. It was not an invasion. It was deployment across the galaxy. Worlds reported the arrival of human vessels. They did not attack. They did not demand. They simply positioned themselves near strategic systems, silent and watchful like sentinels of a war that had not yet begun, but everyone knew would come soon. Zalek understood then that this was the real reason. They had been banned not because they were dangerous in battle, but because they were dangerous in peace. They had no interest in ruling, no desire to dominate. They had only one purpose: to ensure that the wars of the galaxy would end before they began, and to achieve that they were willing to remove anyone or anything they saw as a threat, no matter who or what it was. The final truth struck him with the weight of inevitability. The humans were not returning to join the galaxy, they were returning to reshape it. And once they decided how, it should be nothing, and no one would be able to stop them. The council could argue, the fleets could prepare, the scientists could study, but in the end, humanity had already chosen its path somewhere beyond sight. The spearhead ship lingered, its black surface blending with the void as if it had never moved at all, and in its shadow the next chapter of galactic history was already being written, not in words, not in treaties, but in the quiet march of soldiers who had learned long ago that the only way to win was to end the game entirely and to never let it be played again. And as Zalek watched the stars, he heard the strategist's final words echo in his mind. Like a prophecy, they will not come for victory, they will come for completion. And when they are done, the galaxy will not remember the wars, it will only remember the silence that followed. The galaxy had become a place of waiting. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the human fleets positioned themselves in quiet formation across the systems. No banners, no fanfare, no threats, just presence, a presence so absolute that no one dared test it. The council met in endless sessions, speaking of negotiations, alliances, countermeasures, but their words were hollow, for they all knew that if humanity had returned, it was not to talk, it was to act, and when they acted it would be swift and final. Zalek walked through the academy grounds, now strangely empty. Training exercises suspended, classes cancelled, cadets sent home without explanation, but he stayed not because he had orders, but because he wanted to see it through. He had begun this path when he opened that forbidden archive, and he would not step away now. From the highest balcony, he could see the long curve of the horizon and the faint glint of ships in orbit like cold steel stars waiting for a signal only they could hear. Thought of everything. He had learned the battles, the rules, the treaty, the vanishings and the return, and the truth became as clear as the black void above. Humanity had never been the enemy, they had been the solution, the one force willing to do what the rest of the galaxy could not even imagine. They had no need for conquest, no hunger for territory, only the relentless certainty that war itself must be erased, and if that meant erasing those who sought it, then so be it. Across the comm network, a final message began to play in every system at the same time. The voice of a human, calm, steady, without anger or pride. We will not be your rulers, we will not be your allies, we will be your answer when the question of war is asked, and when we have answered, there will be nothing left to ask again. The fleets began to move, then not in a single direction, but in all directions at once. Streams of black spears vanishing into hyperspace, leaving no trail, no sound, only the deep, unshakable knowledge that wherever they went, the cycle of conflict would be broken, not with compromise, but with completion. Zalek stood alone on the balcony long after the last ship disappeared into the dark, his heart heavy not with fear, but with the weight of knowing the galaxy would never again be as it was. The age of negotiation was ending, and the age of silence was beginning. The humans had returned, and they would not leave until their work was done far beyond the rim of known space. The spearhead ship waited, watching the patterns of the galaxy unfolding like a puzzle, and in its shadow an entire civilization prepared not for victory, but for the end of the game itself. And when it was finished, there would be no more questions, there would only be the end.